Welcome to PIMCO Pod. In this episode, we discuss recent U.S. policy developments, including the Warsh Fed nomination and surprising Democratic gains in Texas special elections. Stay tuned after the conclusion of the podcast for additional important information. U.S. Policy Update: Warsh Fed nomination and Texas special elections by Libby Cantrell. U.S. policy headlines haven't slowed this winter. On the heels of what felt like a very long January, February starts with the government partially shut down. President Trump announcing his nomination of Kevin Warsh as Federal Reserve Chair, and Democrats winning big in a series of special elections in Texas over the weekend and hoping that the results are a harbinger of things to come, and not just a result of the specialness of special elections. Of those three headlines, the partial shutdown appears most likely to resolve and fade quickly. As of this writing, key congressional leaders appear confident about a resolution this week. We could be revisiting the issue of government shutdowns yet again come September, however, when fiscal year 2027 funding bills will need to be passed. Kevin Warsh nominated to lead the Federal Reserve. On Friday, after months of speculation, President Trump announced the nomination of Kevin Warsh as the next Federal Reserve Chair to succeed current Fed Chair Jerome Powell, calling Warsh the whole package and out of central casting. Warsh, a trained lawyer, similar to Powell, who started his career in finance in Morgan Stanley's tech group, the same group I happen to work in as a lowly analyst at the same time, went on to join President George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors and later the Fed as a Fed governor from 2006 to 2011. More recently, Warsh has been a Fed bugaboo, calling for institutional change, including a much smaller Fed balance sheet. An ode to independence. Central to the discussion around the next Fed chair has been the question of Fed independence, the ability of the Fed to make monetary policy decisions without political interference or pressure, as Powell has said, without fear or favor. The question is more acute due to some of President Trump's recent actions, including his attempt to fire Lisa Cook, a current Fed governor, and the Department of Justice's investigation into Powell. Guardrails? While our view is that there are plenty of guardrails to ensure Fed independence, including the fact that a change in monetary policy requires a majority vote among the 12 members of the Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC, the Fed chair is only one vote, and general congressional oversight remains in place. Warsh has also been a vociferous advocate, at least historically, of Fed independence in the realm of monetary policy. He has, however, outlined how he thinks regulatory policy is a different beast and does not require independence. Indeed, in a speech he delivered as a Fed governor in 2010, An Ode to Independence, Warsh talked about how detrimental a loss of Fed independence would be. If the Federal Reserve lost its independence, its hard-earned credibility would quickly dissipate. The costs to the economy would be incalculable: higher inflation, lower standards of living, and a currency that risks losing its reserve status. He also discussed how independence is ours to demonstrate, not principally to declare. Warsh's 2010 declarations will be tested during the Senate confirmation process, which is not simply a rubber stamp. Reminder: Senate confirmation requires 50 votes. Currently, there are 53 Republicans in the Senate. Indeed, President Trump has had to withdraw more nominees from Senate consideration than any other modern president, given anticipated troubles with the Senate confirmation process. Some observers have pondered whether Kevin Hassett, considered to be the front-runner for the Fed for a while, and maybe Trump's preferred candidate even today, was ultimately passed over because of concerns around his Senate confirmation process. In our view, this underscores that while not very public, the oversight process and the check that Senate confirmation provides still work. We do not expect Warsh to have any trouble ultimately getting confirmed, although he is unlikely to sail through the Senate confirmation process as easily as he did in 2006 when he received effectively unanimous support for his nomination. At the same time, we do not expect Senate confirmation anytime soon. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, the retiring swing vote on the Senate Banking Committee, the first stop to Senate confirmation for any Fed nominee, has praised the selection of Warsh, but has also vowed to hold up the nomination until the Trump administration withdraws the criminal investigation into current Chair Powell, something President Trump as recently as Friday said he would not do. While it is anyone's guess we would expect the Trump administration to ultimately and quietly withdraw the investigation of Powell to make way for the Senate confirmation process, seeking to have Warsh confirmed by or before the June Fed meeting. As a reminder, Powell's term as chair ends in May 2026, but he can stay on as chair until Warsh is confirmed and can also theoretically stay on even after that as a governor until his governor term is up in January 2028. Whether Powell stays has been up for debate, but one plausible scenario is that he stays on through the midterm elections, when Republicans may lose a Senate seat or two, or three. A narrower Senate majority would help safeguard the Fed even more from being too political. Turning to Warsh's likely policy priorities, we note his focus on the balance sheet could be at odds with Trump's affordability agenda. Richard Clarida, PIMCO's global economic advisor and a former Fed vice chair, discussed this topic on Friday. One of Warsh's longest-standing views, shrinking the Fed's balance sheet, could be at odds with Trump's recent push to get mortgage rates down. Indeed, one of the more actionable items on Trump's affordability agenda has been to direct the housing agencies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to use their balance sheets to buy agency mortgage-backed securities, MBS, which has helped to contract mortgage rates incrementally. At the same time, however, the Fed is allowing its $2 trillion in holdings of MBS to run off, which amounts to selling MBS and creates a technical headwind to the MBS market. There was some thinking that a new Fed chair could stop this runoff, helping to support the MBS market, but the likelihood of that under Warsh seems particularly low. Bottom line, while Senate Democrats may reflexively vote against Warsh, we think his views on Fed policy, and in particular, his 2010 views on the importance of Fed independence, not to mention the general support for him from across industry and policymaking, will mean that his confirmation will be largely perfunctory. As such, we would expect him to be seated by the June meeting most likely, assuming the administration withdraws its criminal investigation into Powell. Of course, given Warsh will only be one vote on the 12-member FOMC, his ability to influence the direction of the Fed or to effectuate significant change remains an open question. Texas special elections, a fluke or a future trend? Over the weekend, voters in Texas took to the polls for several special elections. One of those elections, for an open state Senate seat, saw a Democrat, Taylor Ramat, defeat Republican Lee Wamgans, a candidate whom both Trump and current Texas Governor Greg Abbott endorsed. Not only did Ramat win, he won by 14 points, representing a 31-point swing from how Trump did in the 2024 election in the same district. While it is always dangerous to read too much into special elections, they see so much lower turnout, usually only the most fervent voters. A 31-point swing in what has been described as a ruby red district that no Democrat has held since the 1970s has received quite a lot of attention from not only Democrats, but Republicans too. Indeed, Florida Governor and potential 2028 Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis posted in social media after the Texas election that while special elections are quirky and not necessarily projectable, re general election, a swing of this magnitude is not something that can be dismissed. Republicans should be clear-eyed about the political environment heading into the midterms. Remember, if past is prologue, the party out of power, Democrats in this case, typically does well in a midterm election, as it is viewed as a referendum on the party in power, Republicans in this case. On average, the party out of power wins an average of 26 seats in the House of Representatives, and Democrats would need to win just 3 seats in order to take back the majority, 218 needed. In other words, Democrats would likely need to only have a so-so night in November to take back the House. That being said, Democrats still could certainly get in their own way. Republican strategist Karl Rove recently wrote that bashing Trump and pandering to the kooky left is hardly a winning formula, and that Democrats need to shore up their views among voters on critical issues. He cited a recent Wall Street Journal poll that voters prefer Republicans on the economy. Republicans preferred by 38% to 32% for Democrats, on inflation, and on foreign policy. If the midterms were held tomorrow, most Democratic and Republican strategists believe that Democrats would be able to take back the House and win back a seat or 2 or 3 in the Senate. The Senate map continues to be an obstacle for Democrats, however. They would need to win back 4 seats, including in places such as Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, and Texas. Not impossible, but certainly very difficult. Bottom line, with 9 months to go, we are still in the early days of the U.S. midterm election cycle, when all 435 seats in the House will be up for re-election, along with 1/3 of the Senate seats. While the signals point to a Democratic victory in the House and maybe in the Senate, although that is significantly less likely, a lot can change in the coming months. That's something Republicans are hoping for, especially as they count on the political benefits of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OB3, being increasingly felt over the next few months as folks receive hefty refunds, on average $1,000 per household, as well as benefit from lower tax withholding and higher take-home pay. Polling, enthusiasm, and Trump's approval ratings in late summer and early fall will likely be more instructive. Thank you for listening. That was U.S. Policy Update, Warsh Fed nomination, and Texas special elections. For future insights, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Macro Signposts highlights weekly takeaways from the data analysis conducted by our team of economists and other macro experts. For PIMCO's official views on the global economy, please visit PIMCO.com. The discussion and content provided within this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and may not be appropriate for all investors. Reliance upon information provided in a podcast is at the sole responsibility of the listener. The information included herein is not based on any particularized financial situation or need, and it is not intended to be and should not be construed as a forecast, research, investment advice, or a recommendation for any specific PIMCO or other security, strategy, product, or service. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Investors should speak to their financial advisors regarding the investment mix that may be right for them based on their financial situation and investment objective. Podcasts may involve discussions with non-PIMCO personnel, and such content contain the current opinions of the speaker, but not necessarily those of PIMCO. Other podcasts may consist of audio recording of an existing PIMCO article, and such material contains the current opinions of the manager. The opinions expressed in all podcasts are subject to change without notice. Information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable but not guaranteed. PIMCO, as a general matter, provides services to qualified institutions, financial intermediaries, and institutional investors. This is not an offer to any person in any jurisdiction where unlawful or unauthorized. For additional important information, go to www.pimco.com/gbl/en/general/legal-pages/podcast-disclosures.